Well, thank you all for joining us today. I know it's possibly one of the last warm days in Michigan, and the fact that you choose to come in here is really amazing. So I hope for, like, whatever you've lost in the warmth, we make for passion on this panel. That's what we can assure you. We have with us 3 panelists who are trailblazers in their own right and have brought together kind of the issue for foreign entrepreneurs. Immigrant or foreign entrepreneurs have made exceptional contributions to the American economy. As 1 in 4 small businesses and high-tech startups were started by an immigrant. In fact, 40% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. And majority of today's unicorns have an immigrant co-founder. Yet what is really surprising is that none of these individuals came to America on a visa designed for startup founders. They came through other pathways. They came either as students, as family members, as workers, and refugees. Therefore, as Michigan, whether it's in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, or Detroit, is in the process of developing this thriving startup ecosystem, I think this is a very important and timely topic for discussion, which, if we can harness the potential for foreign entrepreneurs, will not only lead to an influx of ideas, but also capital. One can already witness this in the high-tech startup in Silicon Valley. On a personal front, this topic also resonates with me. When I worked as a pharmacist, before law school, I was on an H-1B visa. And one day I became convinced that the store-made jewelry didn't give me the variety that I wanted. It just didn't work for me. So I started making jewelry on my own. I became very involved. I put hours on this. My friends started asking me for pieces. And I became so involved. I donated to charities. I did exhibitions. However, I was never able to take that step of opening up my own business. And one of the main reasons was the fear of how it affected my immigration status and not having the network or mentorship to take that leap. So today, to be able to contribute to the dreams of other individuals like me is very meaningful personally. And also on the flip side, we have established startups who could benefit from this foreign talent, but do not have the awareness of how to engage this foreign talent. So I will kind of start off to let the panelists introduce themselves and also let us know why this topic resonates with them. I'll then follow up with questions to kind of highlight the challenges, the resources available, and some concrete success stories before opening it up to the audience for comments or questions, and end with a final message for the panelists. So maybe we can have Prash, Ernestine, and Suzanne start off with introduction.
There's a microphone next on the chair there, and it might be muted. You just push the button on the bottom. If it's red, when it turns green, it's on.
All right, thank you guys for having me. Susmita gave me no option but to join and share my story, which I'm very happy to. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. My name is Prashant Sala. I'm born and raised in India. I moved here for grad school, and then I've been in Ann Arbor for 10 years, worked as an engineer on H-1B for 6-7 years. Then after that, I started my own business. But from being an engineer on a work visa to starting a business and kind of raising some money and kind of, having that stability was a whole process, which you guys don't want to know. But, that's why kind of Susmita invited me, because it's a big struggle for a lot of people on work visas who have a lot of potential, but there's a lot of loopholes that you have to go through legally. And so, we worked out of cahoots, a couple blocks down that way. And, I'm happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you, Susmita, for reaching out. My name is Ernestine Lyons, and I am the program manager for Global Detroit for the Global Entrepreneur in Residence program. And a little bit about me, I have a very global background. I got a master's in international relations, specifically focused on public policy. And before that, I lived in places like Russia, China, India, South Africa, doing research and studying international languages. And so with that path, I really took an interesting, look at economic development, not only as a researcher, but I was able to, upon coming back, apply that to working in the Michigan entrepreneurial ecosystem with organizations like the City of Detroit's Business Opportunity Program out of the Civil Rights and Inclusion Office. I managed programs with Build Institute, worked with and incubated with programs like Tech Town, and from there, I was brought to Global Detroit, and I also dabbled in policy, working for state legislators in Lansing, focused on business and economic development opportunities. I was a city councilwoman myself in my hometown of Harper Woods, Michigan. And so, yeah, I have just a winding road that has brought me to this world of helping international entrepreneurs, including launching a startup myself. And I'm really happy to be here on this panel.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to New Enterprise Forum and Susmita for organizing this panel. When she reached out, I was very excited about the topic. By trade, I am a U.S. business immigration attorney. I work locally here at the law firm Dickinson Wright in the Ann Arbor office. I was just 2 short blocks away from here. I am a townie. I'm a local to Ann Arbor, so not as exciting as a lot of people who travel around in their lifetime, but I do love traveling, so Harry will be downloading the Zonda today. So Dickinson Wright is a full-service law firm. We have 20 offices across the country and an office in Toronto, Canada. So we touch about every single area of law. I have, for the past 19 years, practiced exclusively U.S. business immigration law. And some of you may be wondering, what is that exactly? Because I got that question here today and at other places. But I think because at the foremost, people think immigration, they may think of removal or deportation or DACA or asylee and refugees, but there's a whole world of business immigration. And you've heard 2 people here talk about being on H-1B visas, the letters and numbers, the alphabet soup of immigration. And so I work with companies, startups that are the global mobility of people, moving people from one place to another, and on compliance issues. So that is what I do in a nutshell. I'm really excited to be here because I do work with a lot of startups. I just think it's so exciting, the energy that's there. So we've worked with from the smallest of companies to large multinational global companies. And this topic hits pretty close to home because usually I'm the first landing spot before a foreign entrepreneur comes into the United States because they need to see if they can actually get the work visa to come to the United States.
Well, thank you so much. Let's start. I know, so while I started arranging this panel, I came across Global Detroit. So this was a referral. And I was very surprised because this was one of my things, like, do we have organizations that really help us? So I'll start with you, Ernestine, to give us a little bit about what Global Detroit does and then how it helps startups and foreign entrepreneurs in that space. And then kind of to go back to those questions about the startup visa we hear about, or the international entrepreneur rule, like how does this work? How does it play into your work? I know you must have a lot of opinions about it. And just organization, if you can tell us a little bit.
So Global Detroit is a nonprofit in Detroit, in the city of Detroit, and we are all about immigrant inclusion. We do a lot of work around refugees, and we have a refugee collaborative. We also work in neighborhoods that serve immigrant communities, helping them with, just getting their bearings as new Americans. We also help them with, just small business needs. And my program that I manage in particular is focused on helping international founders who are tech founders, have a legal pathway to working here in the United States. And so you mentioned, and as well, the alphabet soup of different types of, visas and sponsorship. that it may seem overwhelming if you're not an immigration attorney, but the Global Detroit Entrepreneur in Residence program exists and is modeled after something that existed, it was the first of its kind in Massachusetts. So we found out about this program and we brought it to Michigan in 2019. And so just to back up a little bit and give some, explanation, the United States doesn't have an actual immigration policy with USCIS that gives you a visa to stay here and work on a startup company full time. There are no pathways that are going to allow you to exclusively work on that. When we talk about this H-1B or work visa, the sponsorship, it's mostly through corporate entities. And so we have at Global Detroit this Massachusetts model that we brought here, something that is essentially a imperfect solution to a lack of sponsorship. And before I bore you all to death, we are essentially able to partner with universities because they have an uncapped H-1B granting potential. So they can give us many H-1B visas, whereas corporations tend to be capped. They can only hire so many people and have to be full-time. Universities can hire people part-time and they can hire as many on a rolling basis. And so we partner with them, these universities, to bring international entrepreneurs here, and they're legally able to work part-time anywhere from 8 to 10 hours a week, and they spend the rest of the time working on their tech startup. And so Global Detroit since 2019 has sponsored about 13 founders, and we've had them come through our program. This year, we actually ended up having a husband and wife couple from Nicaragua, essentially in the program, and they have an AI company that focuses on, detecting the mood of employees and seeing, how people feel about, their current workplace. It feels very Big Brotherish. But so we work with so many different companies that find us, and then they're really grateful. Like we have had examples of folks who, are on the edge of deportation. They have no other recourse, and they find us and they said, you're like angels. You have given us this legal pathway to grow this company. And, we are a nonprofit, so we're funded through philanthropy. So the program costs nothing to the founder, and they're able to have that employment and that H-1B sponsorship. And so that's essentially who Global Detroit is and what the Global EIR program does.
Yeah, I think it's certainly filling a space that we need before we can formalize a lot of these things. So definitely that. And maybe Suzanne, I'll pass it on to make sense of this alphabet soup, right? Give us some of what are, the concrete pathways people can use.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to do so. I only have a few minutes to talk about an alphabet soup of letters and numbers, and it usually takes me much longer. So you're gonna have to stop me because I don't know if I can get this done in just a few minutes. So set your timer. But there are a number of non-immigrant work visas. Those are your temporary worker visas, where foreign nationals can come into the United States and work temporarily. And then there's also the immigrant visas, which is your pathway to permanent residence, what we all know as a green card, which was green initially, not green, and it is green again today. Eventually that sets them up for a pathway of applying for US citizenship. So the non-immigrant work visas that you find most often, you've heard H-1B is one of the most popular work visa categories. And there's a bunch of different ones, but we're here to talk about entrepreneurs and what sort of visas you can get as an entrepreneur. So I'm just gonna limit it to the very few to hopefully get it under the time limit. So there is actually an E2 investor visa. It is very limited because the E2 is a treaty-based visa. It is only available to citizens who live in countries in which the United States has a treaty with. And those investors can come into the United States and set up a business and be able to get an E2 visa for themselves, but also employees who have the same nationality would be able to get a visa as well. The challenge for a lot of, and I would say the biggest users of the immigration visas in the United States are really two countries that use it the most. And these two countries are not on the E2 visa list. So unfortunately, it is India, which is the biggest user of US-based visas, and we can talk about the 10 to 15-year backlog to get a green card if you were born in India. And China is the second country, and it can take 5 years on a backlog to get a green card if you were born in China. And these two countries are not on the treaty list because the United States does not have treaties with India or China. But there's a whole other slew of countries where they are. So the number one question that we always ask people is, what is your nationality? We're not trying to discriminate, it's because we want to see if there is a visa that works for you. And so the E2 visa is a beautiful program if you can fit into it, because it allows the investor to come into the United States, set up the business. But it is not designed to be a visa for you only or for your family. The purpose of this visa is really to create jobs in the United States and help stimulate the US economy. So you have to have a business plan that really shows how you expect to grow the business in the United States. And then one that is not limited by nationality is what we call an L1 intra-company transfer visa. But that requires that these individuals have been worked for a company outside of the United States for 1 full year before being able to transfer to the US. So we do quite a bit of L1 intra-company transfer visas, and they can be smaller companies, but I say, think big picture. If you're thinking we're in Metro Detroit area, automotive, Ford and GM and the like, that's how they globally move their people, is through intra-company transfer sorts of visas, but it works for small companies as well. And so if there are companies that have offices, let's say in India, and they want to set up a business in the US, it sets them up for an intra-company transfer. And so that is one way that you can also get individuals across. And the other one, and I'm sure I'm out of time now, so tell me to stop, is a temporary worker visa, and it's an O1 extraordinary ability worker visa. And that also requires an employer to sponsor you, but that's really a great option for those who have great ideas, like Zonder, who want to set up a business, have these concepts, and you can help show that you have extraordinary ability in a field. It could be in the arts, in business, in sciences. And so that's another way to get people over temporarily. And then there's the green cards, which I won't get into because we're out of time, but they're parallel. There's parallels between the non-immigrant visas and the immigrant visas.
Let's move to Prash. So I think Prash, you've actually gone through this process. So maybe give us how it was, and maybe starting off, what was the initial thing? So like I said, when I was on H1B, I didn't even dare to take the leap. You did take the leap, and how did you make it happen? So that initial contact with a startup, how were you able to get that network or mentorship?
Yeah, so I'm glad Suzanne kind of, gave us a backdrop of the landscape of this, but how many of us are kind of familiar or heard about H1Bs before? Okay, so like half the room. So I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a quick video on YouTube by a theoretical physicist called Michio Kaku. And he said once that America has a superpower for science and innovation for growth. And that superpower is H1B, which means that there's a lot of H1B workers in this country who fuel science and innovation as workers for large corporations. And the way it's designed, it's either right or wrong. For me, from my perspective, it's not the way it's supposed to be, and it's not the way it should be. But it's designed for a lot of workers from all over the country, all over the world, to come to America and fuel science and growth. What it's not designed, at least for now, is for any H1B worker to start a new business. So I'll give you a quick story for myself. So I came here about 11 years ago on a student visa. I wanted to do a PhD program in automotive research. And then I graduated with a master's program, moved to Ann Arbor about 10 years ago. And I started working as an H-1B worker in the automotive industry as an engineer, like a lot of other H-1B workers do. And I was like, you know what, I'm really not meant for this. Like, I'm really meant for starting a business and doing something exciting and making an impact. But then I quickly realized that it's not that easy. And I called 20 lawyers. So Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but 19 of them said, hey, you shouldn't do this. This is 2019. This is not right for you. It's risky. You shouldn't even think of starting a business. And I asked why. And the response was, you know, you can't really start a business. You can't really quit your job because then you have to have a visa, because otherwise you know, if something goes wrong, you have to go back. So the risk is you start a business and you do a little things, you start paying yourself a little bit, and that's, you know, going against the law, and then you have to go back. So there's a lot of red tapes around a lot of H-1B workers starting a business. And then, so there was this 20th lawyer in Chicago. He's like, you know what, there is a gray area. And I was like, all right, you're my guy. Yeah, that's all I want to hear. And then, so then he was like, you know, there's a way you could do this, but it's not a straight way. You know, there's a few things that you have to make sure. I was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. So I did that. And then, I don't know if you guys know this, there's a bar called Bab's Underground Bar, a couple blocks this way. And then one Saturday night, I still had my full-time job. I just met a random guy who invested $250,000 the week after. And then, so all of a sudden I had funding, I had a few employees, and I still. Yeah. So yeah, I had some money and then I had a few employees, but then I was still an employee of H1, you know, as an H1B worker for my main job. And then I was like, oh shit, how do I, you know, figure this out now? And then that lawyer in Chicago who was a creative lawyer, he said, you know, do this, do this, do this. And I did that. And then I basically did the H1B transfer to my own company. And I had to make sure like it was done in a way that it's not breaking any laws. But it's a nightmare. Like for any H1B worker, for any kind of work visa worker to be able to start a business, it's something, it's like last night I posted on LinkedIn saying, imagine if you're running a 100-meter race and then you're 20 feet behind the starting line. That's how it is. That's how it feels like, because you have to do a lot to even get to the starting line. And you know, if these barriers are somehow kind of removed, like you know, we might have like 5 Googles in the next 20 years. That's because of the huge potential of H1B workers, you know, L1 workers that want to start businesses, but they're almost like brainwashed into, you know what, this is not for me. Like, you know, the system's not designed for me to be able to do this. But, you know, I'm glad that I was able to do it, and I can share my story. But, you know, long story short, it's not that easy, but as an ecosystem, we should really encourage anybody and to be able to like share their story and say, you know what, we'll give you any help you need. Because that's what a lot of these H1B workers need, is just support. And then, you know, we can figure out the legal stuff, but then there's a lot of stigma around the community, like, hey, I can't really start a business. But, you know, you definitely can. And we as an ecosystem, we definitely should be able to support those people.
I think that's really a hard one, so because that's what it is. It's not just about even being able to do it. It's getting to that point to ask for that help. And I think the flip side of it, you said, of course, there are people who want to do this, but we also know a lot of startups that find somebody, like maybe you come into a space like that and you meet somebody, but they are on a visa or they are maybe a student and they're like, okay, how do I engage this person? And that's equally hard. So it's not only hard for the people that decide that they want to do something, even for established startups to say, I would like to have this foreign talent because I think it can help them grow. So I'll kind of turn to Suzanne because I think you do the flip side as well quite a bit. So if you can maybe share some stories and what else is involved for organizations that want to hire talent, like how do they go about it?
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of you have to get creative. And you need to find out those that are willing to get creative with their strategies to help set businesses up. So I have an example of a aerial firefighting business. So their job is they fly tanks, airplanes that mostly on the West Coast to put out forest fires. There is a specific type of plane that is flown that is mostly trained with Canadian citizens. They fly these planes often and they know how to maneuver them. They've got the training. And it was very difficult for them to find individuals in the United States that have that specific type of training or the airplanes. And so we needed to find a way to bring this set of Canadian citizens into the US to do it. We do have a treaty with Canada, USMCA, the United States Mexico Canada Agreement, NAFTA previously. And so the US-based company worked on setting up a new entity with Canadian investors. And so we were able to say that this new business is a joint venture with Canadian-owned investors. So they are the investor gets the visa, and other Canadian citizens who are hired by this US company can also bring in the Canadian workers. And so we were able to help in a good cause, fighting fires in the United States, to be able to come in and get that work done. So there are ways to creatively think and strategize in terms of how can we make this work? How can we bring foreign workers with special skill sets into the United States? And I mean, the industries are great and broad, and you've got from the tech space, the engineering, you've got the STEM fields, but you've also got quite a bit in the arts and in the entertainment field as well. Immigration touches everything because it's the movement of people, and we are the people. And so it really touches on every sort of industry that you can think of. Did I do that in under 3 or 4 minutes?
That's perfect. I think these are kind of some of the challenges, right? Like you always face. So I'll kind of go back to you, Prash. Like, I know you told us a little bit about the challenges. Could you go into things that you really felt that you'd want other people to know about? Because I think a lot of, really being an entrepreneur is the mental space, right? Like, where are you as a person and how can you overcome that? It's not even getting to it. So maybe some of the challenges you face while you are on this journey that you think you want other people to know about, or what they should not worry about, or what they should.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest challenge as someone who is on an H-1B and who wants to start a business, the biggest challenge is the fear of the unknown. Like, you don't know if it's possible and how. So I'll give you one quick story. Before I fixed my legal problem, I shouldn't say a problem, it wasn't a problem, but we send mechanics to your house to do maintenance on your car in a subscription format. So we had a customer complaint, and the customer called me because I was customer support. And then it was like late in the night, the customer said, hey, this mechanic you sent didn't do a great job, and he was really angry. And because I didn't fix my immigration problem back, then, I was like, I don't know what this means to me. And there was a lot of fear. So I called Susmita at like 2 a.m. in the morning. I was like, because she's the only lawyer I know. And I was like, oh, this is what happened. I don't know what to do. I'm kind of really scared. So basically the challenge was to be able to like educate myself on how this works, the legal system works, and then to be able to solve that in a way that makes sense and it's less risky. And so yeah, the first challenge is just to kind of educate yourself, like, hey, this is how it works, because there's a lot of misconception in this space. I'm sure, like Suzanne probably is familiar with. The biggest misconception is like, hey, I don't think, because I'm on H-1B, I don't think I should start a business because it's not possible. It is possible. It's just, you just have to be a little more creative and you just have to educate yourself. And then be a little open to taking a little bit of risk, but it's not as bad as people think. So it's more about like education and then more tactics later on.
Yeah, I think that comes to what is like, the space that you're in for a lot of the immigrant population is like, who are you connected to? How do you know, right? The know. And I think one of the things while we're talking to a lot of the panelists is like, so like I'll pick on India just because I know that. So we have a lot of people from Gujarat, right? Like in the community, people who have opened like gas stations or who have opened something because there is this know-how in the community to do it. But to really get to scale up entrepreneurship is a completely different ballgame because that know-how isn't there. And I think that's what a system like here brings in, having a startup system that's able to bring in these people and kind of walk them through so you don't run into, I do remember that call at 2. I was actually just getting ready to go to Geneva the next day and I was still in packing mode. And I mean, you can identify with that fear because in the first fear that comes into somebody who's on immigrant visa is like, will something happen? So it's not even have I done right or wrong. And in this case, I believe like you had done everything that the customer had wanted, you had refunded his money, but yet your only fear was, did he bring a complaint forward? How would it jeopardize if I hadn't got things corrected, right? And the other thing I think we don't talk about, being on H-1B, you have to satisfy other requirements. So you're not only doing the 40 hours that's required of your job, you're putting in additional time to do this. So it's also how much can you set in and how much of a high tolerance for risk that you have. I think that comes up very prominently. And with any immigration, most foreigners do have a tolerance for risk. That is why you're able to immigrate in some way. At the same time, it's like, what's that threshold and how does it affect your own life and everything? And I think, Ernestine, this is something you come in close contact with, right, with Global Detroit, that you mentioned some of the programs that you have. And how has it been? Like, I know you can only take in so many people, given the time, space, and time that you have. So it's like 18-month program. So what happens to many of the ones that you cannot accept, or maybe people you do accept, and then the universities don't come through with a contract? What happens if you could share some of that?
Well, so, our program is very unique and it's the only one that exists doing what we do in Michigan. And so, there are a lot of different conundrums that come up. For example, because we're funded by philanthropy, we can only take in so many people, and then we have so many university partners who can then take in our entrepreneurs. And I'm looking over there on the graduates wall. Passive Folks is actually one of our companies. And so, it can be challenging to make sure that you're providing resources and you are making sure that you're cultivating all of the things that an entrepreneur who is growing, scaling, and funding their company. A lot of them will come to us and they do have certain criteria that it takes. And to your point, we do have to be selective. As our program grows, we're not only morphing into more of a cohort model so that while people are in our program for that limited amount of time due to that funding that's given to help them grow, they have up to 2 years to be in the program. And we have a team of industry experts who are a part of our vetting committee. And that vetting committee, we have people from Invest Detroit, from Tech Town, from Michigan Founders Fund, really helping us to determine, what companies are going to be successful long-term and have viability, and do they have a minimum viable product? Are they raising Series A? What are some of the criteria that we would normally judge a company's, long-term success on. And so, that wasn't something that we had in the beginning because we were almost like taking anybody who had a bright and shiny idea. And so now we have had to evolve because we're serving more people, and everyone has a wonderful, compelling immigration backstory. We have a woman who came from India and she has a robotics company, and we're really excited to have her in our program. And then we've met with several founders even this week who applied to our program. We have someone who is fleeing from Russia and trying to bring their AI robotics company here to the US. And so that vetting committee is really pivotal in helping us narrow down who would be a long-term match for Michigan's economy. But it's also helping someone who, gets bumped up a little if they are in danger of, having to leave the country. And so, there's just a myriad of different factors, but we're happy to do what we do.
I remember you telling me, was it about one of the companies that I think initially got selected for some reason they didn't, and you really had to sit with them when they didn't make it. Do you want to share that story?
So it really, she had a brilliant, she was actually a young woman from China, and, her company was brilliant, she was brilliant. And it was more of an issue. Our program is so unique in the fact that we have to partner with those universities, because all we are is a liaison, and we're a trusted connector. So we have the funds to help a university run our program. And so, but at that point, we had a university partner just one, and we were in conversations with two others, and they hadn't signed a contract yet. So at that point, we had no space for her, and she was crying because she had to actually go back to China. And so, we and it makes me emotional even now, because I was so invested in not only her, and just she's such a sweet person and so smart, so driven, and so we had to, we had no recourse to help her because there was no H-1B sponsorship available for her.
Well, I'm sure, that's kind of the hard things. Before we get to the successes, maybe we should do some questions answers. I know that people are burning to ask questions, but before we open it up, I actually had a question for the audience. Given the limited time and the expertise we could have on the panel, I know there are other parts of the ecosystem for the startup, whether it's accelerator spaces, whether it's VCs. And I would love to hear if there's somebody in the audience who could shed some light, like when they're vetting startups, is this a factor to take into, or what are some of the considerations, or maybe something that the panelists can speak to on those fronts? Did you, are you gonna?
Well, I was just gonna kind of share my story. So most investors, most VCs, they don't even understand what H-1B is. Like for them, it's a given that if you're raising money, that you have, you are able to do that without any issues. But so yeah, from an investor perspective, it's like, oh, you're raising money, okay, cool. So I assume that everything is good, there are no issues. But yeah, so there's a lack of education even in the investor community. Like, what does this even mean? And then of course they would have their own immigration attorneys to kind of vet everything. But yeah, I've seen not a problem at all. But I've also seen a lack of education from the investor community, of course, like, yeah.
Because I would think that would be a very important part of it. At some point, if it goes forward, you would have all those complications that would come that actually jeopardizes the startup, right, in the long run. So I wonder if it was something people actually asked when they vetted a company, like, where are you, who are you, like, where are they from, what is the immigration backgrounds for me and things. I do see some questions coming in.
I have one for Global Detroit. So they come in this program and they're working for a university while they do their own company. When 18 months ends, what happens then?
Oh, that's a great question,
Yeah.
actually. So we like to think of it as like a 6-step process, for our program. We find people, they apply to the program, we meet with them, and then we put them before the vetting committee. They then start their job. We work with universities to cater a job specifically for them. They then have H-1B sponsorship. And, then once they're in the program, they're growing their business, the business should get to a point where, it's self-sustaining, or at least that's the idea, behind having them in the program for, just no longer than 2 years. And so, what happens after that is we work with them with a team of immigration attorneys that we have, we consult with a lot of really talented people who can help them with concurrent H-1B options. And then there's also, we just encourage them to start the process of, for example, if someone wants to apply for a more long-term visa, we work with them early on in the program. For example, we have a couple, a husband and wife couple, we're in our program right now, founder and co-founder. One is applying for an O1 visa, which is the person of extraordinary talent. And then the other is applying for an EB2 or national interest waiver. We have had people get into our program, and then after 6 months, they had already been applying for a green card. Green card comes through, they left our program before their time even was up. Other cases where, you know, their company became so successful, they could transfer an H-1B. But we have had mostly folks kind of transition into an H-1B, an O-1 visa, that person of extraordinary talent. We have had one person, unfortunately, just leave the program and go back to their country. And that's not the best outcome that we want. You know, we want people to stay in Michigan and to, you know, grow here. So, but that's essentially, we work with them to transition into a long-term visa.
I have a question here. So just to continue, so this is more of like a national situation, right? When you mentioned you kind of transplanted the idea from Massachusetts, right?
So to clarify, we found out about it's called Global EIR. It's a Global Entrepreneur in Residence program. It started about 10 years ago by a guy named Craig Montori. And, you know, he saw that there was a need because we don't have that, you know, we have, you know, as mentioned by Suzanne, you know, this sort of like very narrow way for folks to come into the country, but we needed another solution, something that, you know, was a workaround. And so the very first program was at UMass Boston, and they leveraged the university system, you know, to have a global entrepreneur residence program. And we replicated the model here in Michigan with our program at Global Detroit. And since then, there have been 13 other national programs. So we are actually a part of a national peer network of global entrepreneur in residence programs. There's Global Cleveland, there's, you know, a program in Alaska, and, you know, so there are programs all over the country. And Global Detroit, as of this year, has started heading up and, you know, managing that whole network of entrepreneur residence programs and giving people guidance on how to start a program that helps international founders.
Yeah, and the reason I asked you this is because if you have people whom you couldn't, for whatever reason, you know, beyond your 18, that you couldn't really, you know, do anything for them here. But if you have a network like that, perhaps you could help them.
We
somewhere
actually,
else.
yes, we have had to do that because, you know, we want people to kind of have a tie to Michigan. And we've had folks come and pitch their business ideas, and we think it's a beautiful idea, but we, you know, they maybe don't see themselves being in Michigan long term. Maybe they're close to, you know, a market in Atlanta. And so we connect them to someone who maybe sees them, you know, would be able to help them with long-term growth for that respective market and industry. Thank
So I
you.
have a question on how the United States compares to other countries. Who's the gold standard? What can we learn from what they're doing? This might be a question for Suzanne in particular.
That's a really good question. And so we can look to our neighbors to the north in Canada. Their professional worker visa program and their pathway to getting permanent residence is much easier than the United States. And those articles that you read about with the talent, Canada taking the talent from the United States, it's not that they're taking the talent, is that the United States programs, the US visa options are limited, and then you find people running out of time, running out of work visa solutions, don't find the employer that's able to sponsor them, and so they're able to go to Canada, where some of the visa programs are more friendly, and sets them up within 3 years to be able to get permanent residence. And so now we are finding more and more naturalized Canadian citizens who now are able to come to the United States and work under what we call the TN Trade NAFTA visa, because that's a visa that's based on nationality, Canadian citizenship or Mexican citizenship. And then they come back to work at companies in the US as now Canadian citizens. And then you're also finding US companies that are setting up offices in Canada so that they can if someone doesn't win the H-1B lottery, they can send them to work with the business for their Canadian offices. So that is something that is really lacking, and it's in the H-1B visa program. It's the quota. It's the limitation on the number of visas we have available. To put context into it, there are 65,000 visas available each year and 20,000 for US, those who earn the US master's degree or higher. There's a lottery system. This last fiscal year, they said 85,000, there were 760,000 registration applications, the highest that the system had ever seen. So what are your chances of winning this lottery if you've been here on an F1 visa as a student, you've invested 4 years at a university, perhaps a master's degree, a PhD, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting to get this visa number so that you can work in an H-1B, and then you don't get it. And it's only gotten worse because the number of people applying for the H-1B has increased exponentially over the past few years. So that is one model. But what the US does better than Canada is our E2 investor program. So we make it easier for investors to come into the US, but only if they have a treaty with the United States.
What's the financial requirement for the L visa?
That's a big question. There isn't a dollar amount, but when you're setting up a business, which you really want to look to, and I always use the magic number of $100,000 in the US business bank account is a safe number, because that shows that you are serious about the business. You have the resources available to cover your overhead, to cover your expenses, cover payroll. So generally, that's a good number to have when you're starting up a business.
Hi, my name's Andy. Just by way of background, I've lived in 5 different countries. I've immigrated to the US 3 times. My immigration attorney tells me it's her personal record. So I have some knowledge of this. I've also run the startup groups at both U of M and MSU. So back to the question about what do you do if you're doing a startup and you run into visa issues. What I used to tell my startups is literally move to Canada, move to Toronto. And let me tell you why. It's very rare that you'll get a startup out of a university in this country that doesn't have at least one non-US citizen attached, because just look at the grad students, they're doing PhDs at university. They're pretty much, I don't know what, 50–60% at least that are from foreign countries. And right now we're just telling them, thank you very much, here's your PhD, see you later. In Canada, you can get a visa. When I had my employees from Brazil immigrate to Canada, they got residency in 6 months. Very easily, because they're both engineers, they had kids, and those are the sort of people Canada wants to attract. And so the reality is, and I'll say this to anyone, if you're having immigration issues, that what was said about moving to Canada and then eventually moving to the US is a really legitimate path. Because there's a lot of roadblocks to getting immigration in this country. If anybody wants horror stories, I've got lots.
Should we continue with,
So what can groups like ours or people in the room like us do to help move a lot of these things or clear the roadblocks?
That's a great question.
did you want to read?
Yeah, I mean, so my thoughts is there's a sea of H-1B workers who are extremely talented, who have a lot of potential, but they themselves have misconceptions and fear. So what we can do, this is a great starting point to just talk about it. And I think this is a really, really rare instance. I haven't been part of anything like this or the audience or however, anywhere before, and I haven't even heard about it. I think the first step is just to talk about it, just like this. Share on social and just kind of educate everybody, saying, look, there's a lot of H-1B workers out there who live in fear and anxiety, because if they lose their job, they have 60 days. If they don't find another job, they have to go back. If they want to join another company, that new company has to sponsor. And if they don't, they can't just kind of switch. They can't just be like, you know, I'm going to quit my job, I'm going to be an Uber driver. No, you can't do that. You have to have a relationship with your employer. So there's a lot of people like that. 60–70,000 every single year, and it keeps adding up. So I think the first step is just to kind of talk about it And then the other thing we could do is we could hold events specifically for them, saying, look, free education on legal, free education on, some use cases where successfully people have started businesses from an H-1B origin. Those would go a long way, because a lot of people on H-1B, they have nowhere to go. All they can do is to talk to a lawyer, and, and they get a black and white answer. Hardly there's like, hey, there's this creative answer, or there's this gray area, which is obviously not their fault. It's just how the system is designed. So yeah, these are a few things, at least to begin with, we can just talk about it more.
You guys.
Have you been able to raise institutional funds before you start your legal process?
We're getting there, Francis. We're getting to the success stories. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so the question is, did I raise any institutional money before either before fixing kind of my H-1B issue? The answer is no, I didn't raise institutional. I just raised an angel round before even thinking about how to solve this problem. So I raised an angel round, the guy I met at a bar, 250K, and then I was like, oh, how do I fix my immigration problem? And then I fixed that, and then I raised institutional close to 5 million now. But basically the idea was, when I go to institutional investors, they have no idea. They don't even have questions. Like I as a diligent founder, I have to tell them saying, look, I'm on H-1B, it works, and it's everything is great. And then they just kind of run it by their own immigration attorney to make sure, this founder is on H-1B, is everything good? And they give a yes or a no.
Did any of you want to add a little to that?
Well, as far as what people in this room can do, I think for our program, a lot of people haven't heard about it. And I actually ended up meeting Prasad at Michigan Tech Week. And, he said, I wish I'd known about, because your timeline lines up about when our program was launched. And so, just spreading the word and letting, people know that Global Detroit helps entrepreneurs who are, looking to, work exclusively on their company. And if they need a pathway to do so legally, we're here. And then also, if you're with universities, we are looking to expand our partnerships. We were actually given a huge grant from the state of Michigan to expand statewide. We were just in Southeast Michigan. Now we've expanded to Grand Rapids. And so we're hoping to partner with more universities so that we can bring in more founders, because we have funding. We just want to be able to help as many founders as we can, and to provide that American dream. And I actually wrote an opinion editorial talking about the utility of the startup visa and like why we need it, but why our program exists in lieu of that. And so, just please spread the word about Global Detroit. Connect with me. I'd love to connect with all of you. And that's one way that can be helpful.
And I think with Steve, who spearheaded the whole Global Detroit.
Oh my gosh, how have I not mentioned, our executive director is a very illustrious guy. I'm quite sure like most people in the room have heard of him or know him. Steve Tabachman, he's a former state rep, and he did a lot of work in immigrant communities when he was in the legislature. He's also an attorney, and since then he started Global Detroit, and it has morphed and evolved and become this liaison for helping all immigrants deal with all sorts of things when it comes to being a new American.
Just gonna add one thing. I think it's also important to remember that H-1B employment is at will. And so the H-1B workers are generally at the mercy of their employers. So if they want to let them go, then as mentioned, they've got this 60-day window to find another employer. Most of the time, I would say that the H-1B workers are able to find a new employer. Not too often that I see that they don't find another employer to sponsor them. But if it is someone that's in that situation, and it's incumbent upon them too, really, to look at other avenues and get creative. This is where the creativity really comes to play. do I qualify for an O1 extraordinary ability worker visa? Could I qualify for a national interest waiver that doesn't require an employer sponsorship, but depending on the country where you're from, that may or may not help you immediately. And looking at places like Global Detroit or partnering in other ways. So it's really important, I think, as well for the foreign nationals to reach out and seek consultations to say, what else can I do?
Well, I think we've heard a lot about the challenges on the darker side. And the whole idea is really expanding, the startup ecosystem not only brings us individuals that can do it, but the capital that flows by it, the ideas that come from it. So maybe we'll switch over. What are some of the success stories? I'll start with you, Prash. Tell us of where you are right now at Good Hood, how it has evolved.
Yeah, so right now, we raised 4.5 million in total. We're still pretty small. We have about a 25 people team, based out of Ann Arbor. We have operations in Detroit and Dallas. Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Suzanne.
I gave the success story of the client, right? So I think I answered that question. That are the same.
Global Detroit has been having a really good year. At the end of last year and then this year, it was announced that we received a $5 million grant from the state of Michigan. And so a lot of our programming, around helping immigrants. In particular, I don't think I've mentioned that we have a global talent retention initiative for international students. A lot of that funding goes towards that, in addition to, the work in neighborhoods and our entrepreneur in residence program. So we have more than enough funding to help as many entrepreneurs as need be. And so we're really excited to be able to help, people from around the world, make Michigan home and, grow their startups here. We want unicorns here in Michigan, and we want, the companies that are going to revolutionize the way we live, work, and play. And so, we've had, just a surge of interest in our program this week. Between this and last week, we had at least 5 applicants into our program. Very, very serious, businesses that, already have MVP, already have, some form of angel investment. And, they have been winning pitch competitions and things of that nature. And so they're coming from around the world and they're hearing about our program organically. And so I think that not only were we able to expand to Grand Rapids and hire a second me to, head up that work, but, we're really hoping to have more success with helping those founders in a way that's, we want to have a cohort model that we can pair them with mentors, so if any one of you in here who, loves to help, startup founders, help them, being mentored or coached, we would love to have that. And so, with that expansion comes more investment into the founders and looking at how we can help them connect to more customers, more capital, and more opportunities to be coached and mentored.
Should we maybe end up with a final take-home message that you have? I think we've already had a few, but one final thought from each panelist.
Yeah, I think I would just say, like there was a question, what can we do? I think the easiest thing to do is if you encounter someone who's on a work visa, and if you see that that person wants to contribute to the economy by starting a business, kind of try and kind of empathize with them and try and make some connections. Yeah, I think that's the least we can do.
That's a good one. It's always about the connections that we make. I would say, just from where I stand, it's plan early. Start early in your planning, because everything's so time sensitive in immigration and you can run out of time before you know it. So planning is important, and reaching out early to keep yourself in line and staying in lawful status.
I think that's a really great question, like the closing words. And like, I think that, I really want to just thank, this organization for, really inviting me to be a part of this panel and for, thinking of Global Detroit, because, it's been an uphill battle for, us to try to bring this information and educate people on what is needed, for international founders and the particular battle that they are, I think that, it was mentioned that, you're starting behind, most entrepreneurs who are, just going through Techstars Detroit, and they've already got, a head start on this and that, and they've got, this mentor and that person who's behind them, this amount of funding, but, you don't have the legal hurdles that you have to contend with. And so, I would have to say that this is like a call to action, and, I'd love to have more of you be acquainted with, just the struggles and the uphill battles of international founders, and, just be cognizant of that, and, encourage employers to think of international students as well. I mean, that's the other half of what my organization does. We actually just had a career fair where we want to connect employers to international students. And so, yeah, I would have to say that what can we do is a great question, because, there are so many different ways that you can, educate, you can refer people. If you know anybody, send them our way. And so I just want to thank everybody here for listening to, our success stories and asking questions.
Thank you. So I'll just end on the note. I think, like they say, what isn't measured doesn't get done. And that's what happens when people remain faithless or the stories are not known. And I'm hoping this is the first step to making it. And, while putting this together, I'm like, yeah, maybe we don't have all the answers. Maybe it's not as interesting because I'm not one of these people. But all of us, when you hear the human side of something, is what makes you think. And sometimes the people who are going through it themselves actually find it harder to come out of the solution. It's people on the other side that does. And I think NEF is such a great organization for making the space available, for making, connecting people in the startup ecosystem. So I couldn't think of a better place to have this discussion. So I do want to thank NEF for, letting me on this panel and doing it. I want to thank our panelists for really bringing out the human story behind it. And, and even from the audience, we see this is something that we really do need to work on. We start thinking, I don't know where we'll get to or what we can. The whole idea is really starting to think about it, putting all our resource and our minds to it. So thank you again for tonight, and a round of applause for our panelists.